Ohio, 1983. Winter came earlier than usual. Snow blanketed the low rooftops, freezing over the small roads leading to the highway. The town of Maplewood seemed to huddle under the biting winds sweeping in from Lake Erie. The textile mill, once the pride of the place, now stood silent with shuttered windows and a tilted "for sale" sign in the yard. Only a few months ago, the hum of the looms and the laughter of workers had echoed all the way to Main Street. Now, all of that was just a memory. Sarah Johnson stood by her window, a cup of cold coffee in hand, watching snowflakes roll slowly down the glass. The two-story wooden house at the end of the street wasn't big, but it had once been warm and alive with her daughter's laughter. Now, the silence seemed to have weight, pressing down on her shoulders. Just last month, Sarah had been working the morning shift at the mill, the place she had been since she was 18. She knew every machine, every sound they made. Then Harold Kent, the new manager, had arrived, bringing with him an air thick with authority. He didn't just nitpick every detail of the work, he humiliated employees right in front of everyone. Sarah still remembered that fateful morning. "Johnson," Harold barked, "are you asleep? These few yards of fabric aren't up to standard at all." Laughter erupted from a few nearby workers. Sarah's cheeks burned. She tried to swallow the humiliation and keep working, but his voice rang out again, louder, sharper. "If you can't do the job, I'll find someone who can. There's no shortage of people looking for work." Sarah walked out of her shift that day and never went back. She came home and told Michael everything. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze softened. "You don't deserve to be treated like that. We'll figure something out." The words felt like a warm blanket on a freezing night. But that blanket didn't last long. Weeks passed, and Michael's wages from the auto repair shop weren't enough to cover the mortgage, the utility bills, and the repairs for the leaking roof. At the same time, gas prices rose, and the town's grocery store raised the price of milk and eggs. One evening, as Sarah set the table for dinner, beef stew with mashed potatoes, Michael sat down without even removing his coat. He didn't touch his plate, just looked at her. "You've been home all day, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with fatigue but edged with cold. "I work my hands raw at the shop, and you? Have you even been looking for a job?" Sarah gripped her spoon, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am looking." "But what? You think we can live on promises?" Michael cut in, pushing his chair back with a wooden scrape. He walked into the living room, leaving her alone with the steam from the stew cooling in the air. The next day, Sarah dropped Emily and Sophie off at school. On the way home, she stopped by the grocery store, but could only afford a few essentials. Her wallet was so thin, she had to put back the tub of butter Emily loved. Back home, she hung up her coat and stood in the still kitchen. Outside, the wind whistled through the wooden fence. Inside her, an emptiness crept in like cold fog. She remembered her younger years, when she thought marriage was a shelter, a place to lean on. Now it felt like a sealed room with no windows. That evening, Emily and Sophie chattered about their day at school. Sarah smiled, serving them more meat. Michael, though, stayed silent. He ate quickly, washed his hands, and turned on the TV for the news. Sarah sat alone, looking at the empty seat across from her, remembering the days when Michael used to hold her hand during their courtship, promising he would never leave you alone. That night, when the house was asleep, Sarah got up and poured herself a cup of coffee. She stood at the window, watching the snow fall under the streetlight. Somewhere out there, the textile mill still stood, dark and lifeless, like an old beast that had stopped breathing. She wondered where she would go now that the familiar road had been blocked. On the kitchen table, the paper calendar marked the remaining days before the mortgage payment was due. Sarah tore off the last page of the old month, the sound of the rip sharp in the quiet house. A new month had begun, but she felt no spark of hope. She sighed, took a sip of the cold coffee, and walked into the living room. Michael was dozing on the couch, the murmur of the TV blending with the wind outside the window. Sarah looked at him for a long time, then turned away. In that moment, she knew that this winter would be longer than all the winters before. For several days, Sarah tried to keep her distance from Michael's words. She threw herself into housework, picking up the children, cooking, and in the evenings helping Emily with her homework and listening to Sophie talk about school. In those moments, she felt that part of herself was still intact, the part of a mother who wanted her home to be filled with the laughter of children. One morning, while folding laundry in the living room, Sarah heard the giggles of Emily and Sophie coming from the backyard. The two were playing at taking care of dolls, feeding them, changing their diapers. Sarah stood in the doorway, leaning her shoulder against the wooden frame, watching them, and the thought came to her. Maybe it's time. The idea of a third child had been quietly weaving through her mind for months. Not because she was unhappy with Emily and Sophie, but because she believed a baby could bring the family together again. Give them a shared goal instead of constant arguments about money. At 33, Sarah still believed she had the health and love to raise another child. That evening, after cleaning up the kitchen, Sarah poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of Michael, who was sitting at the dining table reading the newspaper. He folded the paper, looking up expectantly. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Sarah began, her voice soft, as if afraid to wake a sleeping Andy. What are you thinking? We have another baby? Michael stared at her, as if he had just heard a bad joke. Another one? He let out a dry laugh. Are you kidding me, Sarah? No, I'm serious. Emily and Sophie are old enough. They can help me take care of the baby. Remember? We used to want 3 kids. Michael pushed his chair back, the scrape of the legs against the floor sharp and cold. Do you have any idea what we're living through right now? I'm drowning in bills, roof repairs, the kids' school fees, car repairs. And you're talking to me about diapers and formula? I'm out of strength, Sarah. I just thought, you're not thinking at all. His voice rose, his face flushing with anger. I work myself to the bone all day, you stay at home, and now you want to add more to our load? That's insane. The last word hit Sarah like a slap. She felt her cheeks burn, her hands trembling. Michael grabbed his coat, didn't look back, and walked out the door. The slam echoed through her chest. The house fell silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock. Sarah sat down, feeling as though she had just lost something important, though she couldn't name it. That night, while clearing away the unfinished dinner, Sarah heard footsteps on the porch. The door opened. Michael came in and went straight upstairs to his small office instead of to the kitchen. She heard the sound of the phone dialing. Then his voice, low. Yeah, right. There was a time I thought about leaving. No, not now. But back then I didn't know what else to do. Everything felt stuck. Sarah stood on the staircase, her heart pounding. She held her breath, afraid even the sound of it might let him know she was listening. Each word he spoke cut deep. He had once thought about leaving her. When Michael hung up, Sarah returned to the kitchen, trying to act normal. But inside, a new hollow had opened, wide and cold as the winter wind outside. The next morning, Sarah dropped the children off at school earlier than usual. Emily kissed her on the cheek before running off, while Sophie turned back to wave. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. On the way home, she stopped at the grocery store. Linda, her mother-in-law, was standing at the produce section. Sarah, Linda nodded, her gaze sweeping from head to toe. I heard from Michael you're thinking about having another baby? Before Sarah could answer, Linda went on. Don't be foolish. Emily and Sophie will be in college before long. You want to make this family carry another mountain to feet. These days, a woman has to keep her family standing, not break its back. Her voice was cold and firm. Sarah only nodded, saying nothing. Inside, she felt another layer of ice settle over her. That evening, Sarah made roast chicken with corn, Michael's favorite. But he ate quickly and retreated to his office. Emily and Sophie asked their mother, "Is Dad mad because you want another baby?" When Sarah stayed silent, Emily mumbled, "I don't want one either. At school, everyone says we're already poor." The words caught in Sarah's throat. She wanted to tell them that love and family were bigger than money, but even she was beginning to doubt it. As night fell, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers turning a cold cup of tea. The image of Michael on the staircase the night before, his voice admitting to a friend that he had once thought of leaving her, replayed over and over in her mind. Part of her wanted to confront him, to ask directly, but another part was afraid the answer would end everything. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. In the wooden house, the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, a reminder that winter had only just begun, and it would be longer than she imagined. On Saturday morning, the snow was ankle-deep. Sarah wrapped a scarf around her neck, carrying a bucket of sand to sprinkle on the steps so Emily and Sophie wouldn't slip on their way out. From the living room, the TV played a news report on unemployment in Ohio. Thousands still jobless after the mill closure. The news anchor's voice was as dry as the numbers he recited. In the kitchen, Sarah carefully washed her hands and began preparing breakfast. Eggs, toast, and fragrant coffee, the things she knew Michael liked on weekends. But when everyone sat down at the table, the air felt heavy, as if someone had shut all the windows tight. Michael read the paper. Emily tapped her spoon against her glass of milk. Sophie silently gazed out the window. "Dad, can I go to my friend's house today?" Emily asked. "Which friend?" Michael didn't look up. "Cindy. Her parents invited me and Sophie to go ice skating." Michael nodded. "All right, your mom will take you." Sarah smiled at her daughter, only to realize Emily didn't smile back. Instead, the girl turned to Sophie and whispered something that made them both giggle. Sarah didn't know why, but that smile made her feel like she was standing outside the circle of her own family. At noon, when Michael took the girls ice skating, Sarah decided to stop by the grocery store. Linda was at the checkout counter, holding a bag of oranges. "Sarah," she said, her voice low but cutting, "I told Michael about you thinking of a third child. You should listen to me. Don't add more burden to this family." Sarah pressed her lips together. "I just thought." "What you think doesn't matter," Linda interrupted. "What matters is what this family needs. Emily and Sophie will be in college soon. We have to take care of them first. A new baby will only drag everything down." The words dropped into Sarah's chest like stones sinking into a deep well. She nodded to end the conversation, then quickly left the store. That evening, Emily and Sophie sat in the living room, doing homework while music played from a small radio. Sarah brought in a plate of warm cookies. "Here, have some. I just baked them," she said. Emily looked at her mother, pressing her lips together. "Mom, we think it'd be better if you didn't have another baby." Sarah froze. "Why?" "Because everyone at school knows our family is having a hard time. Having a baby would be embarrassing." Sophie lowered her head, avoiding her mother's gaze. Sarah set the tray down on the table, silently looking at her daughters. Inside her, a strange feeling rose, not just sadness, but as if pieces of herself were being quietly taken apart. In the days that followed, Sarah went on with her routine, cleaning, doing laundry, cooking. But the more she worked, the more she felt like a shadow drifting through the house. Michael still left early and came home late, smelling of motor oil, tossing out a few questions about dinner or bills. No one in the house seemed to notice the things she did. When Sarah cleared the snow from the walkway, Michael only said, "You should focus on the inside of the house first." When she made the beef stew Emily used to love, the girl ate only a few spoonfuls before saying, "Mom, I'm not hungry." On Sunday afternoon, Sarah went to help her parents at the farm. Her mother, Margaret, was in the kitchen making pumpkin soup. "You lost a lot of weight," Margaret remarked, handing Sarah a new knitted scarf. "I know you're under pressure, but you have to remember, you're not just Michael's wife or Emily and Sophie's mother. You're my daughter, and you're you." Sarah hugged the scarf to her chest, feeling the warmth of the soft yarn. But at the same time, her heart ached. Margaret still sent her small gifts: a scarf, a jar of face cream, a jar of berry jam. They were tokens of love, but sometimes Sarah felt they were also reminders that she was in the position of someone who needed saving, not someone who could stand on her own. When she got home, Sarah found Michael sitting at the table, looking over the bills. He glanced up and asked immediately, "Have you applied for any jobs yet?" "Yes, but what?" "You need to find one quickly. We can't live like this forever." Sarah wanted to say she was trying her best, that finding work in a small town wasn't easy, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew all she'd get in return was a frown and a sigh. That night, when the whole house was asleep, Sarah went to the living room. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in the scarf her mother had given her. Outside, the wind swept through the bare trees. Inside, the wall clock ticked steadily, measuring the time she felt trapped in. She looked around the room, at the family photos taken when Emily and Sophie were little, when Michael still had his arm around her in every picture. The smiles in those photos seemed to come from another world, far from the silence now blanketing the house. Sarah whispered softly, as if to herself, "When did I disappear?" That morning, Sarah woke with a dull headache. Dim lights seeped through the curtains, but she didn't want to leave the bed. Michael's voice came from the kitchen. "Sarah, where's the coffee? Where's breakfast?" She pulled the blanket over her head. It felt heavy as chains, yet it was the only thing between her and the outside world. Michael's firm footsteps approached. The bedroom door swung open. "What are you doing?" "I have to get to work," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. Sarah answered only with a sigh. She no longer had the strength to explain. Michael shook his head and left, the smell of gasoline and oil from his jacket lingering in the air. It was noon before Sarah stepped out of the bedroom. The house was eerily quiet. Emily and Sophie were at school. Michael was at the shop. She looked around, seeing a pile of unwashed dishes and unopened bills on the table. The bright red numbers seemed to remind her of her failures. Sarah went into the bathroom and turned on the faucet. The mirror reflected a pale-skinned woman with dark circles under her eyes and hair hanging in messy strands. She touched the glass, the cold seeping into her fingertips. When did I become like this? She wondered. Once, Sarah always kept her hair neat, put on a bit of lipstick before going out, her eyes bright. Now, all she saw in them was fatigue and emptiness. That afternoon, Sarah tried to busy herself with chores to chase away the feeling of uselessness. She swept the floor, cleaned the windows, made beef stew. But when Michael came home, all he said was, "The car's leaking oil. Gotta fix it tomorrow. More money gone." No words of concern, no glance that acknowledged her effort. Sarah nodded and went back to the kitchen. The smell of stew filled the air, but she had no appetite. That evening, the family sat down to eat. Emily talked about school, Sophie about sports practice. Michael nodded at the girls, throwing in the occasional question. Sarah stayed quiet. She tried to join in. "Today, I cleaned out the bookshelf and found some old stories you used to love when you were little." Emily shrugged. "I'm busy, Mike. You keep them." Sophie only glanced over before returning to her food. The conversation went on without her. Sarah felt like she was sitting at a table that wasn't hers, where everyone spoke the same language, but no one heard her voice anymore. That night, while washing dishes, Sarah suddenly remembered an evening years ago. Michael had helped her wipe the table, and they had both laughed when Emily played with toothpaste. Back then, she had believed love could overcome any hardship, but now they were just two people sharing a house, meeting out of obligation, rather than the desire to be together. From the living room, Michael called, "Sarah, did you lock the door? It's cold." "Yes," she answered shortly. The next day, Sarah decided to go out, not to shop, but simply to step outside the four walls closing in on her. She put on a gray wool coat, wrapped the scarf her mother had given her, and walked to Main Street. The small shops were open, but not busy. A few familiar faces smiled at her. Sarah nodded back. But inside, she felt like she was playing the role of the woman who's fine, hiding the truth that she was anything but. She stopped in front of a clothing store, looking into the display window. In the dim light, her reflection merged with the mannequins dressed in smart office skirts and elegant coats. Sarah imagined herself wearing one. Would Michael look at her differently? Or would he just ask, "And what did you pay for that with?" By afternoon, Sarah was back home. The winter wind whistled through the cracks in the door, carrying the damp smell of melting snow. She prepared dinner early, not because she was looking forward to everyone gathering, but out of habit. Michael came home late. He set down his toolbox, sat at the table, and opened a newspaper. "Found a job yet?" "I'm looking." "You've been looking forever. Maybe you should take something at a diner or a supermarket. No need to be picky." The words struck at Sarah's pride. Not because she thought working in a diner was shameful, but because Michael spoke as if any job, no matter how it made her feel, would be enough to silence his complaints, whether or not it erased another piece of her. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, the moonlight through the window falling across her calloused hands. She thought of her mother and the times Margaret had said, "You must remember who you are, even if everyone else forgets." The words echoed in her mind, but Sarah didn't yet know what to do with them. She only knew that if things continued this way, one day she would truly disappear, not from the world, but from herself. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, a small but steady thought crept in. I can't live like this forever. The next morning, after Michael left the house, Sarah stayed at the kitchen table for a long while. Winter sunlight streamed through the window, falling across the morning paper Michael had left behind. The classifieds were open before her, the tiny black letters seeming to whisper, "Help wanted, part-time, full-time." Sarah picked up a pencil and began circling job listings. She didn't care anymore about whether they were the right fit, as long as the job gave her a chance. A roadside diner, a secondhand bookstore, a small supermarket, all of them got marked. For the first time in months, Sarah felt she was doing something for herself, not just to please someone else. After making a rough list, Sarah called her mother. "Mom, I'm planning to apply for jobs today." On the other end, Margaret's voice was warm but cautious. "Are you sure, Sarah? I know you've been so tired, but if you feel ready, go ahead. Just remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself." Her mother's words made Sarah pause for a moment. "I think I have to prove it to myself first," she replied. She put on the blue dress she hadn't worn in ages, threw on her gray wool coat, and smoothed her hair. When she looked in the mirror, the reflection still showed traces of wariness, but her eyes were different, no longer entirely hopeless, holding something that looked a little like resolve. Her first stop was a family diner. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and fresh pies, but when she asked, the manager just shook his head. "We need someone quick on their feet, able to handle pressure. We'll call you if we need." Sarah's smile stiffened, but she thanked him and walked out. Her second stop was a used bookstore on the corner. The elderly owner glanced at her application and said, "We're not hiring, but if you'd like to volunteer a few hours a week." Sarah smiled, but inside she sank. Volunteering didn't pay bills or fix a leaking roof. She kept going, a grocery store, a laundromat, then a small office. Each place gave her another no, another polite but distant look. As she walked home, the wind tugged her scarf loose, but she didn't stop to fix it. Her steps were brisk, almost defiant, as if she could outrun the feeling that she was an outsider in her own town. When she got home, Sarah hung up her coat and found Michael already there earlier than usual. "Where were you?" he asked, his tone suspicious. "Looking for a job." "What kind?" "Where?" "All over, but no one's hiring me yet." Michael shrugged. "I told you, you should take whatever pays. Don't be picky." Sarah sat down across from him. "Michael, you think I'm being picky? I walked all day, asked at every store, and all I got was no, but I'm not stopping." He was silent for a few moments and then said, "I just want things to get better." "So do I," Sarah replied, her voice low but firm. "But getting better doesn't mean I disappear." The next day, Sarah returned to Main Street. She stepped into the town library, a red brick building with large windows, the same place she used to take Emily and Sophie to read when they were little. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, and the quiet was filled with the soft rustle of pages. At the front desk, a gray-haired woman looked up. "Hello, I'm Sarah Johnson. I wanted to ask, is the library hiring?" The woman looked her over, then gave a small smile. "Possibly. We may need a part-time assistant soon. Do you have experience?" Sarah hesitated, then said, "I worked at a textile mill, but I love books. I'm good at organizing and working with people." "Leave your details. We'll contact you next week if we have an opening." Sarah walked out of the library with a strange sense of relief. It wasn't a promise, but unlike the cold refusals before, it was a small crack of light. That evening, she told Michael about it. He didn't smile, but he didn't mock her either. "Hope they call you," was all he said. Emily and Sophie listened with curious eyes. Sophie asked, "Mom, will you work at the library? Will you bring books home?" Sarah laughed. "If I get the job, I'll think about it." They all chuckled softly, and for the first time in months, Sarah didn't feel completely shut out of the conversation. That night, as she cleaned the kitchen, Sarah thought about the day. Maybe the library wouldn't call. Maybe she'd get more refusals. But the The important thing was that she had started. She had stepped out, spoken her name aloud, and asked for a chance. She remembered her mother's words. You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself. And today she had proven to herself that she hadn't given up. Sarah looked out the window, seeing snow begin to fall lightly. Tiny flakes clung to the glass, melting under the warmth inside. She knew winter still had a long way to go, but she also knew that with each passing day, she was learning how to find herself again. The sky was overcast, a thin layer of snow blanketing the rooftops. Sarah was washing dishes when she heard the phone ring. She quickly dried her hands and picked up the receiver. "Hello, this is Mrs. Carter, the library director." A warm but firm voice came through the line. "Sarah, if you're still interested, I'd like to offer you a part-time assistant position. You can start next week." Sarah gripped the phone tightly, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'd be happy to." "Very good. Come in to sign the contract on Monday." When she hung up, Sarah stood still for a few seconds, feeling as though she had just opened the door to escape a long, stifling room. She wanted to shout to the whole world, but her thoughts went to Michael. Would he be happy, or see it as just some trivial errand? That afternoon, Michael came home early. He tossed his coat onto a chair, the smell of motor oil from the auto shop filling the living room. "You're home early?" Sarah asked. "Not much work," he replied curtly. She summoned all her courage. "The library called today. I got the job." Michael paused. "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah, I start next week. The pay isn't much, but..." "Not much?" he cut in, his tone sharp. "Then how is it any different from not working?" Sarah drew a deep breath. "Michael, this is a start. I'll have an income, I'll meet people, and neglect the house," he snapped. "Who's gonna cook, clean, and take care of the kids?" Anger flared. Sarah stared at him. "I've taken care of this house for 12 years without pay. Now I finally have the chance to do something I enjoy, and you act like I'm betraying the family." Michael narrowed his eyes. "I didn't say betray. But, you know, I've thought about leaving." Sarah felt as though she'd been slapped. "I know," she said slowly. "I heard you talking to someone on the phone. You were planning to leave me when things were at their worst?" Michael turned his face away. I just said that. I was under a lot of pressure. I didn't mean it." Her voice trembled with both hurt and anger. "You abandoned me. You let me believe I could rely on you, but you were ready to walk away at any moment." Michael was silent, his fists clenched. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I was afraid I couldn't take care of the whole family. I felt like I was drowning." "What about me?" Sarah shot back. "You think I'm not afraid? I lost my job. I've been criticized by your mother, looked down on by my own daughter, and now you tell me you were afraid. Did you think would carry everything if you left?" The air grew heavy. Emily and Sophie stood hesitantly in the doorway, their eyes uncertain. Sarah turned to them, her voice softer. "Go to your room. I'll talk to you later." The two girls quietly retreated, leaving behind a silence that pressed against the ears. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice calmer but resolute. "I'm going to work at the library. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you." He looked at her, slightly taken aback. "You've changed." "No, I just remembered who I am." Michael said nothing, only put on his coat and slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. Sarah stood still, breathing hard, feeling both scared and strangely relieved. Late that night, as the snow fell heavier, Michael returned. He stepped into the kitchen and saw Sarah sitting at the table, writing in a small notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A new budget. When I get paid, we can start paying off the roof repairs and save for Emily and Sophie." Michael sat across from her. I'm not sure I was right today. Maybe I was selfish, but I'm afraid of losing you." Sarah looked up, her eyes tired but unwavering. "You will lose me if you keep letting me become a shadow in my own home." He said nothing more, only nodded. For the first time in months, Sarah saw a small crack in his rigid defenses. That night, when the whole house was asleep, Sarah stood by the window, watching the snow cover the porch in white. Next week, she would begin a new chapter, not just in her work, but in her life. She knew there would still be arguments, objections, and resistance, but the seed of change had been planted, and this time, she would tend it to the end, no matter the winter storms of Ohio that year. On Monday morning, it was still dim outside when Sarah woke up. She pulled on a thick sweater and carefully tied her scarf. For the first time in many months, she didn't have to fumble with the question, what will I do today? The answer was clear. Start her new job at the library. Michael sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. He said nothing as she poured herself a cup, but his eyes softened slightly. Good luck, he put her. Sarah was a little surprised and gave a small smile. Thank you. Outside, the wind blew bitterly. Sarah walked briskly toward the town's red brick library. When she pushed open the heavy wooden door, a wave of warmth, mingled with the scent of old paper and ink, rushed over her, carrying her back to childhood afternoons reading in a classroom. Mrs. Carter, the library director, greeted her with a gentle smile. Welcome, Sarah. This is your desk, next to the circulation counter. Today's work, reorganize the fiction shelves and enter new books into the registry. Sarah nodded and set to work. Worn-spine novels slid through her hands, each title whispering its own story. But data entry proved challenging. The old typewriter clattered loudly, and every typing error required white correction tape, costing precious time. At lunch, she ate a sandwich in the small break room, listening to her two colleagues, Annie, a young recent graduate, and Ruth, an older librarian, chat. They asked Sarah about her family. She answered simply, avoiding mention of the tension at home. In the afternoon, a group of elementary school kids burst into the library, dashing around and dragging chairs noisily. Sarah hurried to calm them down and guided each child to a book. She couldn't help but think of Emily and Sophie when they were little, curious, noisy, and full of questions. By the end of her shift, Sarah's back ached and her feet felt heavy, but her heart was light. She had truly worked, earned real money, even if just a few dollars, and more importantly, she had existed as a person beyond the roles of wife and mother. When she came home, the smell of stew filled the air. Michael had cooked. I got home early, so I made it, he said shortly. Emily and Sophie listened eagerly as Sarah told them about the library, their eyes curious. Are there a lot of children's books, Mom? Sophie asked. Lots, even comic books, Sarah smiled. Emily murmured, maybe. I'll go study them. Those words warmed Sarah more than any wish of good luck. In the days that followed, Sarah quickly adjusted to the pace. She learned how to classify books using the Dewey Decimal System, handle overdue returns, and politely turn down odd requests like, can I borrow a newspaper from 10 years ago? Mrs. Carter noticed her diligence, often nodding approval. Still, there were looks from the townsfolk. When Sarah walked into the grocery store, she caught whispers. Heard the Johnsons are struggling, so the wife had to work. She heard it all, but didn't respond. Instead, she held her head high, paid for her groceries, and greeted them with a smile. On Friday evening, after 5 straight days of work, Sarah came home later than usual. Michael was on the couch, news on TV. You're late, he said. A group of students stayed to work on a project, and I helped them find materials. He nodded, not criticizing, and Sarah sensed he was slowly learning to accept the change. She told him about her plan to start a Saturday story hour at the library. I think it's a good way to bring the community together, especially the kids, she said. Michael didn't object, only murmured, sounds nice. On Saturday, Sarah volunteered to stay for the first story hour. Only 5 children came, but they listened intently as she read Charlotte's Web. Afterward, a little girl hugged her and whispered, you tell stories so well. The words made Sarah's eyes sting. For the first time in a long while, she felt she truly had value outside the 4 walls of her home. That night, she wrote in her journal, I've started living again, not just existing. During dinner that evening, Linda, her mother-in-law, dropped by unexpectedly. She brought a bag of apples from her orchard and asked, I heard you're working at the library? Yes, Mother, Sarah replied. Linda raised an eyebrow. Well, at least you're not just sitting around here. Michael glanced between his mother and Sarah, looking uneasy. Sarah simply smiled, choosing not to react. Linda continued, if you're earning, make sure to save. You never know these days. I'll remember that, Sarah said calmly, but inside she told herself, I'm not just earning, I'm finding myself again. By the end of the first week, Sarah was physically tired but mentally invigorated. She knew the job alone wouldn't solve all their financial problems, and the tension with Michael hadn't vanished. But it had given her a new anchor, a foundation to rebuild her life. That night in her dreams, Sarah saw herself standing in a vast room full of books, sunlight pouring in through the windows. She reached for the highest shelf and pulled down a blank book. On the first page, it read, "A new chapter of Sarah Johnson." Winter in Ohio was growing harsher. Snow blanketed the streets, and the wind howled through every crack in the doors. But every morning, Sarah still walked into the library with her purple wool scarf and bright eyes. Though she hadn't been there long, the job had already become an essential part of her life. One morning in early February, while rearranging the children's book section, Sarah noticed that the worn-out fairy tale books were still frequently borrowed. She thought, if the children in this town had a book club, they could learn and have fun at the same time, and the library would feel more alive. The idea excited her so much that right after her shift, Sarah sought out Mrs. Carter. "I'd like to organize a regular reading program for kids," she said, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady. "We could choose a different theme each month and encourage parents to join in." Mrs. Carter was silent for a few seconds, then smiled. "I like this idea. In fact, there's an upcoming community initiative competition organized by the State Library Association. If you implement it well, I'll submit it for the contest." Sarah felt her heart pound. She hadn't expected a passing thought to be taken so seriously. "I'll give it my all," she said firmly. In the days that followed, Sarah threw herself into preparations. She sketched a layout for the reading room, selected books, and designed flyers. At first, Annie helped her, but gradually, a few other volunteers joined in. The library's atmosphere became noticeably lively. At home, however, not everyone was as enthusiastic. Michael listened, then said, "I'm glad you found something you enjoy, but don't let it get in the way of things here. Dinner still needs to be ready when I get home." Sarah bit her lip. She understood that he still hadn't fully accepted her having a life outside of family duties. "I'll try to balance it," she replied, though deep down she knew that to do it well, she needed both time and support. On the first day of the program, heavy snow fell. Sarah worried that no one would show up, but when the clock struck 10 a.m., groups of parents and children walked in, coats dusted with snow. The small reading room quickly filled with laughter. Sarah sat in a chair and began reading The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. Her warm, engaging voice drew the children into silence, their eyes wide. When the story ended, several kids raised their hands asking to read more, while parents chatted about keeping the program going. Mrs. Carter stood in the corner, smiling in approval. "Wonderful, Sarah," she said when it was over. "I'll enter this program into the Community Initiative Contest. The deadline is the end of the month." News spread quickly. Some townspeople stopped by the library to ask about the book club. Some were supportive, others sneered. "Is that really worth entering in a contest?" Sarah didn't let it bother her. She was used to such remarks. At home, Emily and Sophie were the most surprised. "Mom, we heard from our friends about the program at the library. They said you read really well." Sarah smiled, feeling joy swell in her chest. "If you want, come and listen next weekend." Emily nodded, and Sophie hugged her. Michael stood watching without speaking, but Sarah noticed the faint curl of his lips. Preparing for the contest kept Sarah even busier. She wrote a detailed program description, took photos of the reading sessions, and collected feedback from parents. Every night, after the family was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table, the warm yellow light spilling over pages filled with her handwriting. One night, Michael came downstairs to find her still working. "It's late. You should rest." Sarah looked up, her voice soft but resolute. "I want to do this well. This is my chance to prove something to myself." Michael stayed quiet, then gave a small nod before heading back upstairs. As the deadline approached, Sarah handed all the materials to Mrs. Carter. After reviewing them one last time, Mrs. Carter said, "I've never seen a new staff member work as passionately as you do. No matter the outcome, this is already a success." On the day the application was sent, Sarah felt both relieved and nervous. She knew it would be weeks before she heard anything, but inside, the fire was already burning. She had a goal, a drive, and most importantly, she had regained her belief in herself. One weekend evening at dinner, Michael suddenly said, "I told Joe at the workshop about your reading program. He said his wife wants to bring their kids to the library." Sarah looked up, thinking, "Told him? Really?" "Yes. think you're doing something good." It wasn't a grand compliment, but to Sarah, it was a sign of change. Michael was beginning to see her work not as a hobby, but as something of real value. At the end of the month, an envelope from the State Library Association arrived. Mrs. Carter opened it, her eyes lighting up. "Sarah, good news. Your program has made it to the finals. Next month, we're going to the city for the award ceremony." Sarah could hardly believe it. She held the letter, her hands trembling. From someone once seen as useless at home to this moment. Pride and gratitude mingled within her, bringing tears to her eyes. That night, Sarah stood on the porch watching the snow fall. She breathed in the icy air, feeling a new vitality coursing through her. She knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, but now she had the conviction that she was living not only for her family, but for herself. That flame, the one Sarah had thought long extinguished, was now burning bright and warm, ready to guide her forward. That morning, weak sunlight filtered through the winter mist in the small town. Sarah slipped on her gray wool coat and wrapped the purple scarf, a gift from her mother, Margaret, around her neck. She looked in the mirror, adjusted her hair, and smiled faintly. Today, she and Mrs. Carter would be heading to Columbus for the State Library Association's award ceremony. Michael walked her to the door. "Be careful on the road," he said, hands in his coat pockets. Sarah was slightly surprised. "Do you want to come with me?" He shook his head, his gaze lowering. "I've got to be at the shop, but I'll pick you up when you get back." Though the answer was brief, Sarah sensed something in his voice, like an unspoken pride. The long-distance bus carried her out of town. Through the window, bare fields and leafless trees rushed past, like a reel of memories from the lean months. Sarah clutched her handbag. Inside it, a copy of the Children's Reading Club program. Sitting beside her, Mrs. Carter tapped her hand lightly. "You've got this, Sarah. Don't worry." Columbus emerged with its tall buildings and bustling streets, a world far removed from the small town. When they stepped into the grand hall of the State Cultural Center, Sarah was overwhelmed by the golden lights and the hum of hundreds of voices mingling with soft piano music. Attendees were dressed formally, many wearing name tags from prestigious libraries in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo. Sarah instinctively drew her shoulders in, feeling small. But when she recalled that first reading session, the children's eager eyes, the parents' warm smiles, a quiet warmth spread through her chest. The ceremony began. The host introduced each project, major libraries showing off tech programs, STEM classes, rare manuscript preservation initiatives. When it was the turn of Sarah's small-town library, Mrs. Carter smiled encouragingly. Sarah stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady. "I grew up in a small town where children had few entertainment options beyond the TV and the ball field. When I began working at the library, I realized those worn-out books still held something magical. The power to connect children with their families, to spark curiosity and dreams. So I started a reading club, inviting parents to join as well. What I got in return was the bright eyes of children and laughter filling that little room. The library isn't just a place to borrow books. It's a place to plant seeds of hope." A few people in the audience nodded. Sarah ended her talk with one short line. "You don't need a big library to create something great. You just need heart and belief." Applause rose, not thunderous, but warm enough to make Sarah smile genuinely. When the judges left the room to deliberate, Sarah sat in the side row, heart racing. Mrs. Carter whispered, "You did wonderful. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." After nearly half an hour, they returned. The host announced the third prize, then the second. Sarah listened, her anticipation building. And then, the first prize goes to Millfield Town Library for the Family Reading Club project initiated by Sarah Johnson. Sarah froze for a moment, then burst into a tearful laugh. Mrs. Carter squeezed her hand. "Go on, girl." Stepping up to receive the award, Sarah accepted the framed certificate and the envelope of prize money. The stage lights glistened in her eyes. In that moment, she didn't think of the criticism or the weary months. She felt herself standing tall, steady, and worthy. The host handed her the microphone. "What would you like to say to people in other small towns?" Sarah smiled. "Believe that your story matters. No matter what anyone says, let your light shine. Don't wait for someone else to light it." Applause filled the hall. A few people approached afterward to shake her hand, asking to share her idea with their own libraries. Sarah no longer felt like the woman tucked away in the kitchen. She had become part of something bigger. By late afternoon, the bus brought her back to Millfield. Stepping off at the station, Sarah saw Michael waiting. He said nothing, only opened his arms. She stepped into them, feeling his hug tighter than usual. "I'm proud of you," he murmured into her ear. "Truly proud." Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you for finally seeing me." That night, the whole family gathered. Emily and Sophie examined the certificate, asking over and over, "Mom, what did you say on stage?" Sarah recounted it, emphasizing that the victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the children who joined the club, the parents who believed, and the whole small town. Linda came by, holding a cup of hot tea. She looked at the certificate and said quietly, "Sarah, maybe I was wrong. I thought you were only meant for housework, but you've done something many wouldn't dare try." Sarah didn't answer immediately. She just smiled. Recognition, even late, carried a sweetness hard to describe. When night fell and the family was asleep, Sarah sat alone on the porch. The wind was bitter cold, but her heart was blazing warm. She thought back on it all, leaving the textile mill, the arguments, the doubtful stares, and that moment under the stage lights. She whispered to herself, "I did it, and this is just the beginning." Moonlight spilled across the certificate on the table, a reminder that her light was finally being seen. Not because someone else lit it for her, but because she had sparked it herself and let it burn bright. Spring of 1985 came to Millfield in the gentle yellow of daffodils. On Main Street, small shops redecorated their windows, trying to chase away the lingering gloom of the recession. The library where Sarah worked also put on a new look. A few pots of flowers placed by the entrance, a freshly painted signboard, and inside, a colorful children's reading corner. Sarah walked in early in the morning, holding a paper bag of homemade waffles. "Good morning," she greeted Mrs. Carter, her voice cheerful. Now, going to work each day was no longer a duty for Sarah, but a true joy. Since the victory in Columbus, the number of book club members had doubled. Children chattered over comic books, while adults borrowed novels and how-to guides. Sarah realized that, little by little, the library was becoming the heart of the community, just as she had dreamed. In the evening after dinner, Michael folded up his newspaper and said, "Sarah, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we buy that piece of land behind the house to grow more vegetables. We can work on it together, and you can use part of the harvest for the club." She looked at him and smiled softly. It wasn't just a farming idea. It was a sign that he truly wanted to be her partner. "Sounds great," she replied. "But are you sure you'll be okay getting your hands dirty?" Michael laughed, ruffling her hair. "I've fixed an old diesel engine before. A few tomato plants will be nothing." Emily and Sophie were changing too. In the afternoons, they helped their mother arrange books or draw illustrations for the club. One time, Sophie whispered, "Mom, my friend said you're famous at their school." Sarah chuckled, cupping her daughter's cheek. "Famous because I make good waffles? No, because you made the library better than anywhere else." Those innocent words were enough for Sarah to feel she had truly passed something on to her children. Not just the story of a woman who went to work, but the story of standing up for oneself. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah and Mrs. Carter were invited to speak at a regional library conference. On stage, Sarah told her journey, from a housewife dismissed and unemployed to finding herself again through work and passion. She spoke openly about the hardships, the tears, and the moments when it felt like everything would collapse. The most important thing, Sarah concluded, is to never let others define your worth. You have the right to rewrite your own story, no matter which page you start on. Applause rang out, and this time Sarah felt it echo deep in her heart. A few weeks later, the library received a small grant from a community fund to expand its programs. Sarah decided to use part of the money for an outdoor reading corner in the summer, and to organize a family book day with games, live music, and a secondhand book fair. That day, the whole town felt like a festival. Michael took charge of the old book repair stall. Emily and Sophie led the guest the story character. Linda, who had once doubted her, manned the charity bake sale table with a constant smile. When she saw Sarah passing by, she gave a small nod. "We changed this place, and we've You've changed this family. Sarah responded with a hug, no words needed. At night, when everyone had gone home, Sarah locked the library door and looked up at the starry sky. She thought of herself a year ago, tired, lost, and invisible. Now, she was not only seen, but also heard and respected. Michael came up beside her, draping his coat over her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking." Sarah paused, eyes still fixed on the stars. "This is just the beginning." He squeezed her hand lightly, and together they walked home. And so, the story of Sarah Johnson came to a close, not as a full stop, but as an ellipsis for a new journey. From a woman who seemed to exist only in the shadows of prejudice, Sarah had stepped into the light on her own 2 feet, with her own heart. I would like to express my deepest thanks to the readers who have accompanied Sarah through every page, sharing in the sadness, the joy, and the silent yet meaningful moments. I hope this story reminds you, everyone has their own flame, and only when we dare to light it will the world be illuminated. Farewell, and see you again in other stories, where dreams, no matter how small, can still change an entire life.